Yeah, again, so my talk's going to be called the ABCs of APIs with Node.js. And if you would like to, in the tweet, mention me, that's my Twitter handle, Garazi. If you'd like to follow up with me, have questions afterwards that you didn't get to ask me in person, my email is simply my first initial last name, grewis@apogee.com, because I work for Apogee. How many of you have heard of Apogee? Okay, that's not many, but that's okay. That's sort of par for the course, actually. Apogee is a API management company that we're based out of San Jose, and if you probably don't know us, but you know our customers. So we have a tons of big name customers, and that you probably interact with on a regular basis, and you're in turn interacting with us. For example, if you log on to Creative Cloud, anybody have an Adobe Creative Cloud membership? Well, that API is actually managed by our platform. If you take a flight and you log on via GoGo in-flight, then those API calls are going through us. If you renew your prescription using the Walgreens mobile app, you're going through us. So again, while you may not know us, you actually do know us indirectly through our customers. And that's actually where this story begins. How many of you have experience working with APIs? That should have gotten every hand up in the room, because you're working with APIs even when you don't realize that you're working with APIs. But how many of you have had to do API management? Anybody doing a few hands? All right, okay. Now, API management is not nearly as fun as actually working with APIs, because API management traditionally over the years has been done with something wonderful called XML. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so XML was the way that even we were doing this at Apogee, and our customers were doing this on our platform. Until about 2 years ago or thereabouts, maybe a year and a half, some of our customers started coming to us and saying, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. And we said, well, we're open to suggestions. Why don't you tell us what you'd like? And they said, well, there's this thing called Node.js. And if we could do our APIs in Node, it'd be a heck of a lot easier than this XML stuff. And we said, oh, that's cool. But who uses Node.js? I mean that like, who uses Node.js? Okay, all right, a few of you, all right. Node is of course, incredibly popular, is gaining in popularity all the time. And we said, all right, well, let's actually go investigate this. Let's actually take a look and see whether Node is a viable platform for building and managing APIs. Turns out, a couple of small companies have been playing with that and doing really, really well. In fact, maybe there's some people here from some of these companies I'm going to talk about. Groupon, anybody from Groupon? No? All right. Groupon went to Node, and when they did, they saw their page load time decrease by 50% just by serving their pages using Node. That was pretty impressive. Doesn't have much to do with an API maybe, but it is pretty impressive. LinkedIn, anybody from LinkedIn? Yeah. LinkedIn moved to Node from Rails for their mobile traffic. And in so doing, they dropped the number of servers from 30 to 3, and at the same time, increased the speed. So we were already interested. Then we heard about PayPal. PayPal doubled the productivity of their developers. Now, if you're a Java developer, please ignore this slide, because they cut the number of developers that they needed by simply moving to Node.js. This is my favorite story, because I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall on the day the team proposed the following. Walmart deployed their Node.js servers, ran all their mobile traffic through it. And they did it on a very low shopping day, Black Friday. I want to know, that to me is just the epitome of, look up balls in the dictionary, it's got to be those guys. I mean, wow. And when they did it, the cool thing is they had 200 million users simultaneously online, and the CPU never went over 1%. All right, so that was sort of the kicker for us. We were like, okay, it looks like Node can scale. This is actually something that we might want to look at. So in summary, what makes Node so cool and allowed all of those things to happen is it's JavaScript coming home. Do you know what I mean by that? Did you know that JavaScript was originally supposed to run on the server? Yeah, so it's JavaScript coming home. It is now JavaScript running on the server. Now, even better, unlike typical JavaScript, it's asynchronous. That's the good news. The bad news is it's asynchronous. And if you've ever run into a race condition, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it is really cool because of that, and that makes it especially powerful when coupled together with the fact that HTTP is a real first-class citizen of the Node environment for making APIs. So that brings me to what is an API? Now, I asked earlier how many of you interacted with APIs, and you all raised your hand, so you can all answer that question, right? What is an API? Application programming interface. Woo! Okay, so what? What's that mean? Actually, you're right. I looked it up. Application programming interface, abbreviated API. It's a noun, a system of tools and resources in an operating system enabling developers to create software applications. And when I read this, I realized one thing. Webster's is out of date. Because, yeah, that technically is correct, but I don't talk about operating systems anymore, right? I talk about all sorts of things that are being connected and interconnected via APIs. So, in the hardware world, you work with APIs all the time, because every time in an app you go to, say, for example, launch your camera on your mobile device. That's actually an API call that's happening, right? When you say, where am I? That GPS is interacting, or you're interacting with the GPS via an API. When you shake to undo, you're interacting with the accelerometer's API, and that's actually what's happening. And in fact, for HTML5, the funny part, back when HTML5 was getting started, everybody's, oh, HTML5, woo! I was at Adobe at the time, and I used to talk about HTML5 and say the HTML5, there's not really much exciting HTML in HTML5, if you think about it. I mean, who gets excited by the article element? Section element, anyone? Right? Okay, it's like, really? The cool, sexy stuff in HTML5 are APIs. They're actually APIs, and we interact with via JavaScript, right? So for us, for today, for this evening, what we're going to say is when we say API, what we're really saying is we're talking about a service or a web service, if you want to say it that way. A service that can expose data or logic, and it's comprised of a set of HTTP or HTTPS endpoints. So in other words, we're using the web to talk to these APIs. Now, when I try to tell people that are unfamiliar with APIs what they are, when I'm on a plane traveling, I travel almost every week, and someone will invariably say, well, what do you do? And I say, I work for an API management company. They say, what's an API? And I had a hard time explaining to them what it really was until it hit me. It's very simple. Applications use APIs like humans use websites. Think about that for a moment. How do you use a website? How do you work? Obviously, you go to a website. Let's say you were wanting to know, looking at a particular company. You wanted to know what's their address or what's their phone number. What would you look for on that web page? Yeah, contact us, right? Or contact or about us or something like that, right? And you would click on that link, and that link is going to take you to that page, right? That's a web interaction that we are taking for granted, right? What it really is an API call. If you don't believe me, I'll explain that a little bit later, but it is an API call. And that's really the way that applications work with APIs as well. So when we start thinking about it like that, it starts to make sense, but it wasn't always that way. Because in the beginning, anybody remember this page? Way back when, all right, I actually go all the way back. I used to joke that I was sitting next to Al Gore when he invented the internet. Some people still remember that joke. Good. I started in the web industry back in 1994. I was one of the co-founders of a little company called GoLive that produced GoLive Cyber Studio that became Adobe GoLive. And then when we were bought by Adobe, I actually left and went to Macromedia to help build Dreamweaver to kill GoLive. But the joke was on me because, as we all know, Adobe bought us too. So, yeah. So, yeah, back in the day, though, this was, the web was a very sad place, right? The pages were static, and in order to update pages, right, we had to manually go out and download, edit, and FTP things back up. That was, of course, until a little thing called PHP came along. Does anybody know what PHP actually stands for? Personal homepage. Why does it stand for personal homepage? Exactly right. It was a CGI script written in 1996 to allow a guy to update his website without manually doing it like I was describing earlier. That's what PHP was for. At the time, it had nothing to do with what we know PHP for today, right? In fact, the first technology that was starting us down the road of APIs was a little thing called Cold Fusion. Blast from the past. Right? Yeah. I know Jeremy very well. I was at Macromedia when we bought them, and Cold Fusion was cool because Cold Fusion set us on the road to APIs. Because Cold Fusion allowed us finally to have a web page talk to a database. Interchanging information or exchanging information, right? But still, we weren't at the API level yet because that data was still locked away in your database. And it was your Cold Fusion application calling your database, right? It wouldn't be until a little bit later, 1999, that Dave Weiner said, hey, you know what? We need a specification that would allow me to say, I want my content or my data to be accessible by other people, but I want to do that in a secure way. And so SOAP and XML RPC was born. Now, we joked about XML before. And, you know, the problem with XML and the problem with SOAP was everybody had their own. There's no standard. It was just, hey, I'm going to make the things, I'm going to decide how I want to let you access this. And you had to come to me and understand all of that, right? It wasn't open. And I'm sorry, it's butt ugly. I'll give you a moment. What does this thing do? Actually, it's getting some... Yeah, but you see what you're doing. You're sitting there going, oh, this is, It's crap. And that's why in 2000, a guy named Roy Fielding was writing his dissertation. I love it. He was writing his dissertation for the Doctor of Philosophy in Information and Computer Science. I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, what do? You go, I'm going to think with my computer, right? But he was writing his dissertation, and he came up with a term. Now, It was called representational state transfer. And as anybody already can imagine, representational state transfer does not have a lot of oomph to it as far as a name goes, right? Like, just not something you want to walk around saying a lot. So we abbreviated that to REST. And of course, the rest is history. Because REST said, let's break it down and make it easy. Let's use the web. Let's use HTTP as our transport mechanism. And let's use the things that we already know from the web, the verbs that we know from the web. Get, put, post, delete. Let's use those to actually interact with our APIs. Now, looking at something like this, what does this do? Yeah, it gets a list of accounts. With REST, an API endpoint is just a URL. And looking at that URL, if you've done it properly, you should be able, as any developer should, be able to divine what happens when I call that, right? And that is the core of REST. But of course, I said if you do it properly, because you need to do it properly. If you do not do it properly, you get a mess. Now, this is an actual API. These are actual API endpoints that are stupid. The front row maybe can read some of these. For the back, the rows in the back, I've highlighted a couple that I think are just totally dumb, because I have no earthly idea what they do. Like callback. Love that one. Do void. Seriously? The one I do like is mass payment. Huh? This is a real API. Now, I'm not going to tell you who it is, because otherwise the guys at PayPal would be really pissed at me. So, crap. This is actually, to be fair, this was PayPal's first version of their APIs. They have since gone back to the drawing board and applied RESTful concepts to their APIs. Because this is not RESTful. This is not RESTful because this is actually what we call it reluctant API design. Reluctant API design is the kind of things that happen when you start down on a project. Maybe this has happened to you. You know, you start on a project, you think you've got it scoped out, and then the boss comes in and goes, oh, we need this too. And you go, oh, okay, screw it. I'll just make something up, right? And there's no planning in it. It's like the boss comes in and says, hey, we need an API to do a mass payment. You go, okay, I'll just call it mass payment. There you go, right? No planning, no thought to any of it. So before we dive into Node, let's understand that we want to build RESTful APIs the right way. When you build a RESTful API, there's several concepts, and I'm breaking down just a couple of them here for you. The first thing is your endpoint should be whatever it is, you know, myapi.com/ and then something simple, a single word, preferably plural, that represents what it is you're going to get. So if I was in a pet store and I was writing a pet store API, I would have /dogs. And now everyone knows when I do a get on /dogs, what am I doing? Yeah, I'm getting all the dogs, right. So that's the first thing, that first point in an API should be that collection. The second thing in the URL should be the resource itself. So if I was to say /dogs/1234, I would do a get on that. What am I doing? I'm getting a single dog, right? This would be probably its UUID, or its a unique identifier, right? So that's the concept. And what you want to do when you're thinking about building these APIs is you want to think 3 is company, 4 is a no-go. In other words, you want to stop. You never want to start nesting things deeper than 3. So here I have /owners, /@number, /dogs. If I was doing a get on that, what am I actually getting?
All the dogs just belong to one owner.
Yeah, all the dogs belong to one owner, right? So you see the pattern? When we start working with patterns like this, they become memorable or easy to remember for us as developers. There's no guesswork about it. There's no thinking, what does callback do? What does do void do, right? So this is how we want to approach building our APIs. But what if you need to go deeper? What if you have other things and you say, well, I really want to be able to dig even deeper than 3? It's not a hard, fast rule. If you got to go to 4, maybe there's an edge case to be made for going to 4. But just don't keep on going. Just don't think, oh, well, now we've memorized it all the way to here. It's okay to add on 3 more, right? Because you and I as developers, the last thing we want to do is look at the documentation, right? Right. Exactly. So we want to know, if I want to give you something beyond that, then we say sweep it all behind the question mark, right? Just like we're used to doing on the web, right? We see these question marks on the web all the time. So I could say, hey, give me /dogs. But I'm only interested in dogs that have a color of red that are running in the park, right? And by doing this, I've actually achieved 2 goals. Number 1, I've made it memorable enough. You don't have to remember all the things. I don't have a long URL. But number 2, I've also given you, the consumer of the API, the developer that's actually using the API, the ability to say, hey, I want something that maybe I wouldn't have thought of, right? Or even better, only a subset of data. So instead of getting select all from Amazon.com, right? I'm getting just what I want. And that is how we build RESTful APIs. And with that, that was the slides. Now I'm going to do something completely crazy. I'm going to live code in front of you. And be warned, I've had a couple of beers too. All right, so here we go. It just makes it better, exactly. All right, so I'm going to start out here talking about Node. Now, I asked earlier who's used Node, and about half of you said you have used Node. So very quickly, Node again, JavaScript. Anything that I can do in JavaScript, I'm making a huge blanket statement here because there may be an edge case, but anything I can do in JavaScript, I can do in Node, right? And have it run on the server. So when we talk about Node, of course, Node can be used just as a web server, but even if it's being used as a web server or to build APIs, what we have to understand is how are we actually going to build a RESTful API with Node? There are several different ways. There are several different modules available out there for Node that allow us to build RESTful APIs. One is a module called Express. Another one is a module called Restify. Another one is a module called Happy. Use Happy.js. There's also, let's see, there's one other one that I was thinking, Sales as well. So there's a lot of different approaches. And you can use any one of them that you would like. I'm not going to pick favorites here. I'm going to use Express today just because I've got something else that I want to show you. So I'm going to use Express to do this. Now, Express is a web server module. That's what its purpose is to be a web server. But again, we're going to leverage it as an API server. So the first thing that we have to understand is how this works. So let me go ahead and start the server. And I'm just going to see, where am I? Yep, I'm in the right place. I'm just going to say node server. And that's going to start this server. And you can see it says server running because I've actually written a console log here to say server is running. Now, what I want to do here is just to prove that nothing works here, I'm just going to go hit that page. All right, nothing is happening here. It's a server, yeah, it's taking up one of my ports, but it's doing absolutely nothing. So now, we need to understand that idea of building APIs, and that all goes back to something in the Node world we call routes, especially in the Express world. routes are nothing more than a definition of the endpoint, okay, the URL. So if I wanted to say, for example, app.get / and make a callback function and just say, I want to send a hello to you. Say, hello, just like that. All right? This is part of Express. It's simply saying that when we hear a GET request on /, in other words, the root of our server, that we should return hello, right? Of course, in order to make this happen, I'm going to have to quit my server and restart it, because once that JavaScript has loaded, it's loaded. All right, and it says hello. All right, so woohoo! Wow, that's an API. Let's drop the mic and get out of here, right? No. All right, let's make it a little bit more interesting. Again, as I said, anything that we can do, we'll just say get, for example, today. And again, I'll do my request and my response. And this request response thing that I'm writing there, that's the callback. That's that asynchronicity of Node, right? So it's saying, I have no earthly idea how long it's going to take for this process to happen, but I'll remember you and I'll do this thing whenever I get word that I'm supposed to, right? So this maybe we'll just say var today equals new date. And then we'll just send down that today. Okay. Save that. Again, restart my server. And again, hello is still working, and now I can go to /today. Oops. Hello. What did I do? Oh, thank you. It helps. /today, and let's go back over and put a /today there. There we go. Once again, restart the server. Bing. And now there we go. Okay. Ooh. Oh, geez, you guys are too easy. All right. So this idea of routes, this idea of simply saying, I want to map out whenever I hear a request, I want to map out what is going to happen, that actually forms the basis of APIs, right? So you and I are looking at this saying, well, in the browser, it looks like this is a URL. It's just a website. Yeah, because again, that's all APIs really are, right? Is just an endpoint of out in space, if you will. Now, I have a database, in fact, running out on the web here. So I'm going to go hit my database. That is, if I'm on the web connecting, it says, come on. So I just got some restaurant data sitting out in a database on the web. And as I said, I was talking about the fact that it's just an API is just a URL. So if I wanted to see this very same data out on the web, instead of looking at it in my portal, I could actually hit this database right now and get that data back, right? So this is an endpoint. This is an API, right? This API is actually running in Node out on the web, right? So this is, again, all there is to it. It's just a URL. And that became sort of the basis of what we wanted to do in building APIs with Node, is to say, all right, let's then have some data sitting out on the web or some service or whatever, an endpoint. We're going to define that and build an API around it. The problem with building like this, though, has anybody ever been in a large JavaScript project where it's gotten so large that you can't remember the names of your functions, so you just write them again? It's okay. I've been there, done that. It's like, I know I've got a function here that does this somewhere. Screw it. It's just faster to write a new one, right? Spaghetti code, right? We end up with spaghetti code. And that is horrible. And that's one of the downsides of JavaScript. That's why there's so many frameworks that have come along. So at Apogee, we thought, well, you know what? Maybe we could make it easier. Maybe we could make this whole idea of building APIs easier if we were just to think about some best practices. So I'm going to go ahead and quit this server. And I'm just going to move up one level here. to my desktop. And we said, what if we could actually build a framework to help you build APIs in a RESTful way, in a meaningful and RESTful best practice way? So we came up with a little project. We started it, originally it was called Apogee 127, or A127 as we call it. The 127 refers to 127.0.0.1. And the desire for us as developers to be able to build APIs offline, just on our laptop, sitting on an airplane, right? Without having to constantly be connected. So this was the genesis of the project. Now the project has morphed, and I'll tell you more about that in just a second. But I'm going to go ahead and start a new project here. The A127 is an NPM or a Node module. So you can install it by just simply saying npm install. I usually do it -g, which is a global install, and then apogee-127. And when you do that, it becomes a command for you. And I'm just going to say, I'm going to create a project for us here. I'll call it sf.html. There. And so now what we're doing is we're actually building out a scaffolding of an app for you in a nice, quote-unquote, MVC method, right? So we're gonna separate out all the things that are happening here, our logic from the actual things that are going on, the models that we're defining. So we've got that done now. So I'm just going to move into that directory, and I'm going to start my server. All right, so this server is now running, which means I can go over here, and instead of going to localhost 888, I'm going to localhost 10,010 / hello. And I can see hello stranger. So I've actually got an API, an endpoint. In fact, it's an endpoint that has some intelligence too. I can say name equals Greg, and it says hello Greg, right? So this little app that is running now is, again, an API. But it looks a little different than what we saw a moment ago. I'm going to go and show you, because I'm going to say A127 project edit. And when I do so, you'll see this. This is called Swagger. Swagger is an open source project. It is designed for defining APIs, being embraced by tons and tons of people. And it's platform agnostic. We don't care if you're building in Node or you're building in Java or whatever. Swagger can help you define your API. And so what we thought was, wouldn't it be cool if we could use Swagger to drive the APIs? Meaning that it was documentation first. Documentation, oh my God, right? But this is what we've come up with. So using Swagger, we can go in and define our API like such. We've got this /hello, for example. That is the path, /hello. And it says, when we call /hello, then we are going to accept a get. And when we hear a get on /hello, what we're going to do is we're going to look to see which controller we need to look inside of. So this is my hello world controller. And which operation ID we're going to fire when that get happens on hello. You'll also notice that I had that parameters. It says parameter name is present in the query, and this should be the name of the person to say hello to, but it is not a required thing. So this is the entire specification for this API, even down to what are the responses that it's going to get back. And we can define both responses for 200, that would be success, or even for errors or any other server thing like a 404 or 500 or whatever. You can define all the things that are happening. And you're doing this, and as you're doing this, over on the right-hand side is the actual documentation being generated. So you actually, when you're done, you can upload those HTML files to your developer portal, and you're done writing your documentation. Okay? So it's pretty cool. Now, even cooler is there's a little try this operation even button. So you can actually, your developers can play with the API in the docs. Okay? So Swagger is pretty doggone cool. Right? And so that's why we're one of the big contributors to the project. And we said, hey, this has got some possibility. So what I want to do now is to make an API for you right now, right in front of your eyes. This is another part of that live coding. We're going to take that /hello, the entire thing. I'm just going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it in. Now, the Swagger editor uses something called YAML. Have you ever heard of it? Okay, yet another markup language. Okay, so that's what we're using is YAML. And YAML is, of course, indentation based. So you got to watch out for your indentation. But even if you get it wrong and you start making some errors, then you'll actually see it happen over here. It'll pull up a little error message and say, hey, you've got an error. But I'm not going to do /hello now. I'm going to do, all right, we have a database that contains data for restaurants. So let's have a brainstorming session. What should the endpoint name be? No, stores. Yes, restaurants, right? Restaurants because we want plurals. So we're going to say restaurants, and also because it's hard to spell. Okay, so /restaurants. All right, then all I need to define what is my controller's name going to be. I'm going to go out on a limb. This is going to be crazy. I'm going to call it restaurants. So restaurants. And then finally, obviously, I would go ahead and say this is going to return a list of restaurants. And then finally, my operation ID. And I'm going to say get restaurants returns a list there. Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't have any parameters, but since these parameters were not required, it's okay that I leave it in here. I would not do that under normal circumstances. So now I've actually got an API endpoint, and it works. I've not done anything, but it works. Because in A127, we actually introduced or added something called mock mode. So if I restart my server in what we call mock mode, then I can hit my APIs without any controllers being present. In fact, I can even specify dummy data to actually be returned without having to actually go in and write any logic whatsoever. But I'm not going to do that now. I'm just going to go ahead and actually get us some real logic here. So I'm going to go and create a new file. I'm going to save this. I'm going to call it restaurants, if I can spell, .js. And I'm going to put that into that sfhtml folder, into my API folder where I have my controllers. So I'm just going to save it right in there. You can see there's that hello world.js file that we saw earlier. All right? So the first thing that I need to do is know how am I going to actually go out and get, it's saved wrong. Let's save that again. I clicked on something. Restaurants is what I wanted. Restaurants.js. Okay, there we go. Save that. There we go. All right. So first thing I need to know is how can I make a call out to that database, wherever it is. Of course, it's going to depend upon the database itself, but I told you already that I have one sitting and living out on the web that is actually that is a RESTful API endpoint. And so I'm just going to do a module. I'm going to say var request equals require request. Now, the request module is one of many. You can use any one that you would like. I'm just using this one because I've used it forever. The request module simply takes care of handling HTTP calls for me, right? So now I need to say, once we call to that API, we have to expose the operation ID that we defined over in the Swagger document. So I'm going to do that by saying module.exports equals and a JSON object, and I'm going to say get restaurants, and I'm going to give it a function name of get restaurants because I'm crazy like that. So I need function get restaurants, and this is going to take my request and my response, and then I'm going to define what is it that this thing does. Now, I'm going to say what I would like you to do is to request my data. The request module, when you call it, takes one parameter, and that is the URL, right? So if we go look back over here at that URL, this is the one that I want, so I'm just going to say copy that, and we'll just paste that right in. Now again, I'm calling out to the web. I have no earthly idea how long this is going to take to come back, so therefore I'm going to add in my callback, so I'm going to say function. In fact, let me just make this word wrap so you guys can see it all on one screen. There we go. So I'm going to say function, and then we're going to say, again, request and response. And then I'm going to say, what do I want to do? I want to send what is coming back. Oops, not request and response. Sorry, that's my bad. I wanted to say what I want to send. What is coming back? There are 3 possible things that can come back. Actually, 2, really, but 3 in the way we look at it. What are the 2 possible outcomes when I make an API call? Yeah, there's success and failure, right? I don't know why, but Node always, in the callbacks, whenever we have an error, it's always listed first. For some reason, Node assumes you're going to fail first. I don't know why. But so I'm going to say, if an error comes back, great, there's an error. Then I have the actual response itself, the entire thing with all of its header information, or I can just say, just give me the body that's coming back, right? And so I want to say, all right, great, send the body. But of course, I really should probably do something like this. If there's an error, then I'll just say res.send, oops, right? Otherwise, and please don't ever do that in a real API. Otherwise, go ahead and send the body like that, all right? So with that, I've done something amazing. I have. I've crashed my server. If you don't believe me, look right there. So you know that whole starting and stopping of the server that I was doing earlier on? Well, with 127, we actually built in a module. There's a module from a friend of ours named Remy Sharp over in the UK. He made a little Node module because he got tired of restarting a server all the time. It's called NodeMon, and we built that into 127 so that you don't ever have to restart your server. Once you start it, we'll monitor everything in the directories, and anytime any file changes, we automatically relaunch your server for you. All right? So it says already, whoops, boom, I can't find that module that you are asking for, so you're going to need to install that. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll just say npm install request. And then I'm going to use this -- save modifier to say what I really want to do is to add this to my package.json file so that when I upload this to the web later, then the server up there in the cloud knows to install this module for me, right? So I'm going to do all of that in one go. And there we have it. So now I can go ahead and restart my project. And now, if all has gone well, we can go back over here. Let's just make sure that hello is still working. Hello is working. It says hello, Greg. And then hello without it. Yep, stranger, it's still working. And so now we say hello, restaurants. And boom, I have data. Now, the cool thing about this, well, you may be thinking, why would I even go to all the trouble since you already had a RESTful API on your database, right? Well, the reason that I do this is because I would never actually do this. This is bad. Why is this bad? Does anybody know? Why is this response bad? Yeah, because look at all the data I'm exposing. There's the actual URL that I was hitting, right? So I'm exposing data. I'm telling you, hey, by the way, if you want to break into my house, here's the address, right? Never would want to do that. So that's another reason for building APIs is to be able to say, you know what, instead of doing this, we're just going to say, all right, let's say body is going to be equal to parse the JSON of the body and only give me the entities section. Right? And now, if I go back over here and I rerun this, now I've just taken away all of that other data, right? And I'm only giving you back data from the thing. Now, I would probably, if this was going to be real, I would probably go in and remove data like that path there, so that you, again, don't know where it is that we're talking about. I'm not giving you any hints as to what kind of database that I'm running, right? But with that, I've got an API. Now, the cooler thing is, let's make a new tab here. And the cooler thing is, A127 project deploy -u. And now I'm actually sending this API to the cloud. So this is a Node project. Anything that you do here can go on any service that can host Node. So Amazon or Nodejs or Heroku or our own Apogee platform, doesn't matter. Because what we've done is we've built our API completely agnostically. Doesn't matter. Anything that can host Node can work. Now, there's one other thing though. I would never do that, what I've just done. Why? Because once you put this thing up there, guess what? Now anybody can hit it. No, and I mean seriously, anybody can hit it. Do you get what I'm saying here? Seriously, anybody can hit it. We've done nothing to protect this API. So now, fire away, hit it hard. There's the URL. If I go to this, copy, put that in there, and say /hello, whoops, /hello. There we go, hello stranger, restaurants. There's my data. But again, anyone can hit this. They can relentlessly hit it, right? They can DDoS on it. Wah! So we don't really want to do that. And that's why the last thing I want to show you, I'm just going to open up a project that's already done. The last thing that we would want to do is to actually implement some stuff to keep this from happening. And we built this into 127 as well. So things like cache. So in order to put a cache on, all you have to do is simply define it in the Swagger document. So here's my cache. It's saying cache it for 10 seconds, right? And then simply apply it. So right down here, I'm applying it. So now anytime you hit that /restaurants, the first time it's going to go out and actually hit it. But then any call after that for the next 10 seconds is going to hit the cache, right? You'll see that, notice that I've got quota on there as well. So here I've said, I want to add a quota. And now we have several different types you can use. You can, like you notice that I'm doing it in memory. You can also do it using Redis if you would like instead. But it says, all right, I'm going to allow 2,000 requests in a single hour, right? When you get that 2001 request, then what's going to happen? Nope. It's not going to stop responding. Nope. It depends on how long it's been since the last one was done. Why? Because I defined cache first and then quota. So we're always going to hit the cache first and then the quota. So that means actually I might get 5,000 requests if they all come during the window that the cache is still valid. I can get 5,000 requests. Now, if I don't want that behavior, then all I need to do is simply flip the order, assign quota first, and then cache, right? We also support analytics, and then finally, oAuth. So, anybody ever had to do oAuth? How was that week? Yeah, right. Right? The beauty is here with 127, we wanted to take the pain out of oAuth. So we allow you to hit our server, the Apogee backend, to do oAuth by simply adding the oAuth declaration here into my Swagger document, and then calling it down here. Let's see, /users there. So I've assigned oAuth to this slash users endpoint. So that means if I go back over here, I've got this already out running on the web, so I'll show it to you. If I just try to get that particular thing, I get, oops, you can't do that because you're not authorized. So now I can say, well, actually, I do want to be authorized. So we built into 127 an endpoint. So whenever you deploy a 127 project, you have 4 endpoints, one of which is called /access token. And that is actually the oAuth provider. So I'm going to pass here my client ID and my client secret that I get off of my portal, my developer portal, and boom, I now have an access token that I can say, okay, let's use that. And I'm going to go get that same /users. Again, I'll show you it breaking first. And then I'm just going to say, instead of that, I'm going to send an authorization header. And that authorization header is going to be bearer and that token I just got. And boom, I now have data. Okay? I don't have to write any logic whatsoever because 127 is taking care of all of that for you. Okay? Now, I told you that that project has morphed. That project has actually morphed into something called Swagger Node. So if you go to the Swagger site or just do a Google on Swagger space Node, then you'll actually see the project that is independent of all of the Apogee stuff. So you can use it literally with anything. Okay, everything works exactly the same. But if you want to use any like oAuth features and all of that, you have to manually add those in. Or you can use the 127 project. Again, it's open source, so we would encourage you if you would like to participate in the project. I'll make sure you guys get the slide deck, but I've got links over to both 127 as well as the Swagger and Swagger Node projects out there on the web. So, Peter, are we taking questions now? Or are we? Okay. Yeah. All right. All right. I've still got more. Sadly, what you guys didn't realize is the session after the break is me again. So go drink heavily. Because I'm going to show you something called the Ignite Engine open source project to allow you to build native applications without writing HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, Objective-C, or Java. Yeah, I'll show that after the break.